Some doors are not locked to keep people out, but to keep something waiting inside, the old man in town had said, though Ethan Cole hadn't believed a word of it until the night the house began to breathe. A slow, hollow rhythm that moved through the walls like a distant echo of something alive, something patient, something that had not been disturbed in years. And it was Rex who noticed first. The 6-year-old German shepherd standing rigid near the far corner of the living room, ears raised high, amber eyes fixed on a section of warped wood paneling as if it were calling to him in a language only he could hear. While outside the wind slid quietly through the pine trees and the last light of day drained from the sky, leaving the house wrapped in a stillness so complete it almost felt deliberate, as if the world itself had stepped back to listen, and Ethan, who had spent years learning to trust instincts over explanations, felt that familiar tightening in his chest, the same quiet signal that had once warned him of unseen danger. Except this time there was no battlefield, no noise, just the low creak of aging beams and the soft, steady sound that came again, faint but unmistakable, like a pulse beneath the floor, and he found himself counting without meaning to, the way he used to count time between distant vibrations, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, until it came again at exactly the same interval, and Rex let out a low, uneasy breath, not quite a growl, not quite. Fear, something deeper, something older, as he stepped closer and placed a single paw against the wall, pressing gently as if testing its truth, and Ethan followed, his boots heavy against the worn wooden boards, each step stirring dust that caught the dim glow of his lantern, until he stood beside the dog and reached out, fingers brushing the surface where the wood felt different, not weaker, not broken, but hidden, like a layer placed there with intention, and when he pressed harder, the panel shifted just enough to reveal the edge of something cold beneath, something metallic, and the air seemed to change in that moment, growing heavier, sharper, carrying a faint scent of iron and time, and for a long second he didn't move, didn't breathe, because some part of him understood that whatever lay beyond that wall had been waiting, not for anyone, but for someone who would listen, someone who would stay, and Rex stepped back slowly, eyes never leaving the spot, as if giving permission or perhaps warning, and Ethan swallowed the weight rising in his throat before pushing the panel aside completely, revealing a narrow steel door embedded into the structure of the house itself, its surface, worn but intact, its handle dark with age, and at its center a small, circular lock that seemed far too deliberate for a place like this, and the sound came again from behind it, steady, patient, exactly on time, like a heartbeat that had never stopped. The metal of the door held the cold longer than the night itself, seeping into Ethan's fingertips as he kept his palm pressed against it, feeling that same steady pulse on the other side, as if whatever lay beneath the house had its own sense of time, its own quiet rhythm that did not care about the world above. And for a moment he considered stepping back, walking away, telling himself it was nothing more than shifting earth or old pipes buried too deep to remember. But Rex did not move. The dog stood there with a stillness that carried weight, his chest rising slowly, his ears angled forward with precise attention. And that was what made Ethan stay, because Rex had learned long ago the difference between noise and meaning, between something that passed and something that remained, and this was the kind that remained. And when Ethan finally pulled his hand away, the absence of that faint vibration felt almost louder than the sound itself, like stepping out of a current, and, realizing how strong it had been, he reached into his jacket and retrieved the small flashlight he carried, its beam narrow but steady, cutting a clean line through the dim air as he traced the edges of the door, noticing details that did not belong in a forgotten house. Reinforced hinges, sealed seams, the kind of construction meant to last, meant to protect, or perhaps to contain, and near the base of the frame, half buried beneath years of dust and debris, something caught the light, a small metal ring attached to a chain, and at the end of that chain, a key, dull with age but unmistakably intact, as if it had been left there on purpose, waiting not to be found by chance, but by someone who would look closely enough. And Ethan crouched down slowly, his knees stiff from the cold floor, and picked it up, the metal heavier than he expected, carrying a weight that felt earned rather than accidental. And as he held it in his palm, Rex let out a quiet sound, not fear, not warning, but recognition, the kind that came when something finally aligned. And for a brief second, Ethan hesitated, not because he was afraid of what might be behind the door, but because some part of him understood that opening it would not just reveal a hidden space. It would change something inside him, something that had been closed off for a long time, and the house seemed to lean into that moment. Every creak settling, every whisper of wind outside fading into a silence so complete it felt almost intentional, as if the world had drawn a breath and was waiting for him to decide. And Ethan exhaled slowly, the sound steady, controlled, the way he had learned to breathe when everything depended on a single action. And without another thought, he lifted the key, guided it into the lock, and felt it slide in with a precision that erased any doubt. And when he turned it, the mechanism responded instantly, not rusted, not stuck, but smooth, as if it had never stopped working. And behind the door, the pulse came again, closer now, clearer, no longer distant but present. And Rex stepped back one pace, lowering his head slightly, not in fear, but in respect for whatever was about to be revealed. The click of the lock echoed deeper than it should have, a small mechanical sound that seemed to travel far beyond the walls of the house, as if it had been waiting years just to be heard again. And for a brief moment nothing else followed, no movement, no shift, only a stillness that pressed in from every direction. And then slowly, almost reluctantly, the door gave way, opening inward with a low, measured creak that revealed a darkness so complete it did not feel empty but full, dense, like something that had settled there over time and learned how to remain unseen. And Ethan stood at the threshold without stepping forward, his flashlight cutting a narrow path into the space beyond, illuminating the first few feet of a descending stairwell carved into concrete, each step worn but intact, edges sharp, untouched by decay, as if whatever lay below had been preserved rather than abandoned. And the air that drifted up was colder than the night outside, carrying that same faint metallic scent, mixed now with something older, something quiet and still, like the inside of a place that had not been opened in decades but had never truly been left alone. And behind him Rex remained silent, but his presence shifted, no longer tense but focused, as if the moment they had been moving toward had finally arrived. And when Ethan took his first step down, the sound was deliberate, measured, his boot landing firmly against the concrete, the echo returning up the stairwell in a way that felt too precise, too clean, like the space itself was listening. And he continued slowly, one step at a time, counting without realizing it, the habit ingrained deep within him, matching the rhythm he had felt through the door. And as he descended further, the beam of his flashlight began to reveal more, walls lined with reinforced panels, cables running neatly along the sides, untouched by rust or damage. And at the base of the stairs, the light finally reached a floor, wide and open, leading into a corridor that stretched beyond what the house above could possibly hold. And that was when the pulse returned, no longer distant, no longer faint, but clear, steady, and unmistakably close. And Ethan stopped mid-step, his breath slowing as he listened, because this was not random, this was structured, intentional, repeating with the exact same interval. And somewhere deep in his memory, something recognized it, not as danger, not as threat, but as a signal, a pattern that once meant something important, something that demanded attention. And Rex moved then, stepping past him with quiet certainty, descending the last few steps without hesitation and pausing at the entrance of the corridor, his head tilted slightly, ears forward, waiting not for permission but for confirmation. And Ethan followed, the weight of the space settling around him as he stepped onto the floor below, the sound of his boots softer now, absorbed by something unseen. And as he lifted the flashlight again, the beam caught the far wall where a series of metal cabinets stood in perfect alignment, each one sealed, each one marked with symbols that felt familiar in a way he could not yet explain. And above them, mounted into the concrete, a single panel blinked with a faint, steady light, synchronized exactly with the pulse he had been hearing all along. And in that moment, standing in a place that should not have existed beneath a forgotten house, Ethan realized this was not something left behind. It was something that had been waiting, maintained by time itself, holding on to its purpose until someone who understood would finally arrive. The faint light on the panel pulsed with quiet precision, casting a soft glow across the corridor that seemed to breathe in rhythm with something unseen, and Ethan stood there longer than he realized, watching it, feeling that subtle pull in his chest grow stronger, not fear, not even uncertainty, but recognition, the kind that came when a memory hovered just out of reach, waiting for the right moment to surface, and Rex moved first, his steps slow and deliberate as he approached the line of metal cabinets, his nose tracing the edges, pausing at each one as if listening for something beneath the silence. And when he reached the third cabinet from the left, he stopped completely, ears lifting, body still, and glanced back at Ethan with a look that was not questioning but certain, and Ethan followed, the beam of his flashlight sliding across the surface until it caught the markings etched into the metal, numbers and letters worn but still legible, arranged in a format that felt unmistakably familiar, the kind used in systems meant for order, for tracking, for remembering what should never be forgotten. And he felt his breath shift as he reached out, brushing his fingers across the surface, the cold metal, grounding him in a way that made the rest of the world seem distant. And when he pulled the handle, the cabinet opened smoothly, revealing rows of neatly organized files, each one sealed, each one labeled with the same careful precision. And for a moment he simply stared, because there was no dust, no sign of decay, nothing to suggest this place had been abandoned, and yet no one had spoken of it, no one had come. And that absence felt heavier than any explanation, and Rex let out a quiet exhale, stepping closer, his gaze fixed not on the files, but on something deeper within, and Ethan followed that instinct, moving past the first row until his hand stopped on a single folder that seemed to draw his attention without reason. And when he pulled it free, the paper inside felt firm, preserved, the edges clean, and as he opened it, the light from his flashlight revealed the first line, typed clearly in a format he knew too well, a name, followed by a designation, and beneath it, a status, and his eyes moved slowly across the page, taking in each detail as if they were pieces of something larger, something that was only now beginning to take shape, and the pulse from the panel echoed again, steady and unwavering, and he realized it matched the pace of his own breathing, the rhythm aligning in a way that felt almost intentional, as if the room itself was guiding him toward understanding. And Rex shifted again, turning his head toward the blinking panel, then back to Ethan, as if urging him to see not just what was in his hands, but what connected it all. And Ethan looked up, the corridor stretching before him, the cabinets, the cables, the silent order of everything. And for the first time since stepping into the house, he understood that this place was not forgotten. It was hidden, carefully, deliberately, waiting for someone who would recognize its purpose. And as his gaze returned to the file in his hands, he felt that quiet certainty settle in, the same certainty that had once guided him through moments when hesitation was not an option, and he knew, without fully understanding why, that whatever this place held was not meant to stay buried any longer. The name on the file did not register all at once. It settled slowly into Ethan's mind like a memory returning from a distance, familiar in a way that did not make sense yet. And he stood there holding the folders slightly open, his eyes fixed on the clean, typed lines that seemed too precise, too deliberate to belong in a place that had been hidden for so long. And as the steady pulse echoed again from the panel behind him, he felt something shift inside, a quiet alignment between the past he had tried to leave behind and the present that now refused to let him walk away. And Rex remained close, his presence steady, his gaze moving between Ethan and the deeper parts of the corridor, as if tracking something unseen, something that connected every piece of this place together. And Ethan finally exhaled, slow and controlled, before turning the page, the paper making a soft sound that seemed louder than it should have in the stillness. And more lines appeared, structured, organized, each one carrying a weight that was not immediately visible, but deeply felt, dates, coordinates, references to operations that were never meant for public record. And though the details remained just out of reach, the pattern was clear. This was not a random collection. This was a system, a record of something that had been carefully maintained. And as he scanned further down the page, his fingers tightened slightly around the edge, because one detail stood out with quiet certainty, a location he recognized, not from a map, but from memory, a place tied to a moment he had long since filed away as something finished, something closed, and yet here it was again, written in ink that had never faded. And the realization came not as a shock, but as a slow, undeniable truth. This place was not just documenting events, it was preserving them, holding them in a state that refused to change. And Rex shifted again, letting out a soft, low sound that carried more curiosity than warning, and Ethan looked up, following the dog's gaze toward the blinking panel at the far wall, the light continuing its steady rhythm, guiding the space in a way that felt almost intentional. And without thinking, he stepped forward, the file still in his hand, his boots moving across the floor with a quiet certainty, as if each step had already been decided long before he arrived. And when he reached the panel, he noticed something he had missed before, a small interface embedded just beneath the light, simple in design but precise in placement. And as he leaned closer, the pulse seemed to respond, not changing, but acknowledging, aligning itself with his presence in a way that made the air feel different, heavier, charged, with something that could not be seen but could be felt. And Ethan hesitated only briefly before reaching out, his hand hovering for a moment before making contact. And the instant his fingers touched the surface, the light paused, just for a fraction of a second, before continuing again, and behind him, somewhere deeper in the corridor, a faint sound echoed, not mechanical, not natural, but something in between, something that suggested movement, not of something new, but of something that had always been there, waiting for this exact moment to begin again. The moment his hand touched the panel, the air seemed to shift in a way that was almost imperceptible, yet undeniable, as if the space itself had acknowledged his presence and was now responding, not with urgency, but with quiet precision, and the steady pulse that had guided him this far slowed slightly, stretching the seconds between each beat just enough to be noticed, just enough to feel intentional. And somewhere beyond the visible corridor, a soft mechanical hum awakened, low and distant, like a system stirring from a long, patient sleep. And Ethan remained still, his fingers resting lightly against the surface, his breath measured, controlled, the way it had always been when something unseen began to unfold. And Rex shifted beside him, stepping closer, his shoulder brushing gently against Ethan's leg, grounding him in the moment, anchoring him to something real as the unseen continued to move around them. And then, without warning, a section of the far wall released a quiet, seamless click, followed by the slow, deliberate slide of hidden mechanisms aligning into place, revealing a narrow opening that had not existed seconds before. And the darkness within was deeper than the corridor, not empty, but layered, holding something just beyond the reach of light. And Ethan lowered his hand from the panel, turning toward the opening with a calm that did not come from certainty, but from acceptance, because some part of him understood that this had already begun the moment he stepped into the house. And now, it was simply continuing, unfolding exactly as it was meant to. And as he approached, the beam of his flashlight stretched into the newly revealed space, catching fragments of detail, the edge of a table, the outline of equipment, the faint glint of something reflective set carefully into the structure of the room. And the hum grew clearer, not loud, but steady, constant, like the quiet work of something that had never stopped doing its job. And Rex moved ahead again, not rushing, not hesitant, but certain, his steps light, controlled, as if he recognized the path before it was fully visible. And when he reached the threshold, he paused, looking back once more at Ethan, not with caution, but with a quiet understanding, as if to say that whatever waited inside had already been chosen, already been set in motion long before either of them arrived. And Ethan followed, crossing into the hidden space with a sense of stillness settling around him, the kind that came when questions no longer mattered as much as what came next. And as the light expanded across the room, revealing more with each passing second, he began to see that this was not just another chamber, not just an extension of what he had already discovered, but something more focused, more deliberate, a place designed for a single purpose. And at the center of it all stood a desk, untouched, perfectly arranged, as if the person who had last been there had simply stepped away, expecting to return at any moment. And resting at its center was a single folder, placed with care, separate from everything else, waiting not to be found, but to be opened. The room held a silence that felt deliberate, not empty but watchful, as if every object within it had been placed with intention and left untouched for a reason that had not yet revealed itself. And Ethan stood just inside the threshold for a moment longer, allowing his eyes to adjust to the subtle shift in light, the beam of his flashlight moving slowly across the space until it settled on the desk at the center, its surface clean, undisturbed, a thin layer of dust broken only where the single folder rested, perfectly aligned as if someone had set it down with care and expected it to be found. And Rex moved ahead without hesitation, circling the desk once, his nose low, tracing the edges of the room before stopping beside Ethan again, his presence steady, his attention fixed not on the surroundings, but on the object that now held all of Ethan's focus. And as he stepped forward, the quiet hum beneath the floor seemed to soften, as if giving way to the moment, allowing it to unfold without interruption, and Ethan reached out slowly, his fingers brushing the surface of the folder, feeling the texture of the material, firm, preserved, untouched by time, in a way that made everything else feel distant. And for a brief second he hesitated, not out of fear, but because something deep within him recognized the weight of what he was about to uncover, the kind of weight that did not come from the object itself, but from the truth it carried. And when he finally lifted it, the movement was careful, deliberate, the edges of the paper sliding softly against the desk as if resisting just enough to be noticed, and he opened it slowly, the beam of his flashlight narrowing onto the first page, illuminating the clean, precise lines of text that seemed almost too clear, too present, as if they had been written moments ago rather than years before. And at the top of the page, centered and unmistakable, was a name, typed in bold letters that stood apart from everything else. And for a moment Ethan did not react, his mind holding still as it processed what he was seeing. Because the name was not unfamiliar, it was not distant, it was his, written, exactly as it had always been, without error, without variation, and beneath it, a designation that matched his service, his unit, his history, followed by a status that caused his breath to catch, not sharply, but slowly, as if the air itself had thickened around him. And the word was clear, final, and impossible to ignore, presumed inactive, and the realization did not come all at once. It unfolded gradually, like a door opening inside his own memory, revealing fragments he had never fully understood, pieces of time that had never quite aligned until now. And Rex shifted beside him, pressing lightly against his leg, grounding him in the present as the weight of the past settled into place. And Ethan turned the page, his movements steady despite the quiet storm building beneath the surface. And more details followed, records of operations, coordinates, dates that matched moments he remembered only as distant echoes. And yet here they were, preserved, documented with a precision that left no room for doubt. And as he read, the hum beneath the floor grew slightly stronger, not louder, but closer, as if whatever system sustained this place was responding to his awareness, to his understanding. And Ethan slowly lifted his gaze from the pages, the room around him unchanged, silent, waiting, as if it had done exactly what it was meant to do, guiding him here, revealing only what he was ready to see, and leaving the rest just beyond reach, for now. The word on the page did not change no matter how many times Ethan looked at it. It remained fixed, quiet, certain, as if it had always been true and he had simply been the last to understand it. And the room seemed to narrow around that realization, not physically, but in the way his awareness sharpened, focusing on the details that now carried new meaning, the dates that aligned too perfectly with moments he remembered as endings, the coordinates that matched places he had walked through, without ever questioning what lay beneath them. And as he turned another page, the structure of it all began to take shape, not as a collection of records, but as a continuation, a system that had followed him long after he believed his part in it was finished. And Rex remained close, his body calm, his breathing steady, but his eyes never leaving Ethan, as if sensing the shift happening within him, the quiet reordering of something deeper than thought. And Ethan lowered the file slightly, his gaze drifting across the room again, taking in the arrangement of everything with a new perspective, the desk placed at the center not for use, but for purpose, the equipment surrounding it not abandoned, but maintained in silence. And the hum beneath the floor now felt different, no longer distant or mechanical, but connected, responsive, like a presence that had been waiting for recognition rather than discovery, and he stepped back slowly, the folder still in his hand, his mind moving through memories he had never fully examined, small inconsistencies, moments where things had not quite added up, where outcomes had seemed too precise, too aligned to be coincidence. And now those fragments began to settle into place, forming something larger, something that extended beyond a single mission or a single time, and his eyes returned to the file, to the line that carried his name, his designation, his status, and he understood that it was not a mistake, not an error in record, but a reflection of something he had not seen, a version of his life that existed alongside the one he remembered, shaped by forces he had never questioned. And as that thought settled, the panel behind him shifted again, the light pausing briefly before continuing its steady rhythm. And this time the response was clearer, more direct, as if the system had been waiting for this exact moment of understanding before moving forward. And a soft tone echoed through the room, not loud, not alarming, but intentional, a signal of transition rather than warning. And Rex turned his head toward the sound, his ears lifting, his body alert in a way that carried focus rather than tension, and Ethan followed his gaze, watching as a section of the wall opposite the desk illuminated faintly, revealing a surface that had been hidden in plain sight, a screen embedded seamlessly into the structure, its dark surface slowly coming to life, lines of text forming with deliberate clarity, and Ethan stepped closer, drawn not by curiosity alone, but by the quiet certainty that whatever appeared there would not introduce something new, but confirm what had already begun to reveal itself. And as the first line completed, he felt that same stillness settle in again, the kind that came when truth arrived not as a shock, but as something that had always been present, waiting only for the moment it could no longer remain unseen. The screen did not flicker or rush to reveal its message. It formed slowly, line by line, with a clarity that felt deliberate, as if every word had been chosen long before this moment and was now simply being allowed to exist. And Ethan stood still as the light from the display settled across his face, the soft glow reflecting in his eyes as he read the first line, not as a stranger encountering something unknown, but as someone recognizing something that had always been just beyond his understanding. And the words were simple, almost too simple for the weight they carried, a designation, a confirmation, a continuation, and beneath it, a sequence of entries that began to scroll with quiet precision, each one tied to a moment in his life that he had once believed to be isolated, disconnected, but now revealed as part of something far more structured, far more intentional. And as he watched, the pattern became undeniable. Every place he had gone, every time he had arrived, somewhere without fully knowing why, every moment where instinct had guided him rather than thought, it was all there, recorded, aligned, preserved in a system that had never lost track of him. And Rex shifted beside him, his ears tilting toward the soft hum of the machinery, his presence steady, grounded, as if he understood that this was not a threat but a revelation, something meant to be seen rather than feared. And Ethan took a slow breath, his chest rising and falling in rhythm with the quiet pulse that still echoed beneath the floor. And for the first time since stepping into the hidden space, he did not feel like he had discovered something new. He felt like he had returned to something that had always known him, always followed him, waiting not for him to find it, but for him to be ready to understand it. And the screen continued, revealing a final section that did not scroll, that did not change, a single line that remained fixed at the center. And Ethan's eyes settled on it, reading the words carefully, allowing them to settle in the same way everything else had, not as a shock, but as a truth that had been waiting patiently. And the line read not as a conclusion, but as an invitation, a quiet acknowledgement that the path he had been walking was not finished, that the choices ahead would not be random or uncertain, but guided by the same unseen structure that had brought him here. And as that realization settled, the room responded once more, the hum shifting slightly, the pulse aligning again with his breathing. And somewhere deeper within the structure, another mechanism moved, not loudly, not urgently, but with the same careful intention that had defined everything else. And Rex stepped forward, his gaze lifting toward the far end of the room where a new opening began to form. The edges of the wall separating just enough to reveal a continuation, a path that had not existed before, and Ethan did not hesitate this time, because hesitation no longer belonged to him in this place. And as he took a step forward, the light from the screen dimmed slightly behind him, not fading, but settling, as if its purpose had been fulfilled, and whatever came next would no longer need explanation, only the willingness to continue. The new passage did not reveal itself all at once. It unfolded slowly, as if the space itself was deciding how much to show and when, the edges of the wall separating with a quiet precision that carried no urgency, only purpose, and Ethan stepped forward into it with a calm that no longer needed to question what he was seeing, because the questions had already been answered in ways that did not rely on words. And the corridor beyond was narrower than the one before, more refined, its walls smoother, its structure more focused, as if everything unnecessary had been stripped away to leave only what mattered. And the light from his flashlight stretched ahead, catching the faint outlines of markings etched directly into the surface, not labels or identifiers, but lines, paths, intersecting shapes that seemed almost organic in their arrangement, like a map that did not belong to any place above ground. And Rex moved ahead once more, his steps steady, his posture aligned with something Ethan could not fully see but could feel, a direction that existed beyond sight. And as they moved deeper, the hum that had followed them began to change, not louder, not closer, but more defined, as if it was no longer surrounding them but guiding them, each subtle vibration aligning with the rhythm of their movement. And Ethan noticed how his breathing had adjusted without effort, how his pace had matched the unseen pattern without conscious thought, and that realization settled quietly within him, not as something alarming, but as something that had always been there, waiting to be recognized. And the corridor curved slightly, revealing a final chamber ahead, smaller than the others, but more concentrated, as if everything led to this single point. And when they entered, the air felt different, lighter, clearer, carrying a stillness that was not empty but complete. And at the center of the room stood a single structure, a vertical console embedded into the floor, its surface smooth, its design simple, and at its core, a soft light pulsed steadily, no longer hidden, no longer distant, but fully present. And Ethan approached it slowly, his steps deliberate, his awareness focused not on what it was, but on what it represented. Because by now he understood that this place did not exist to surprise him. It existed to reveal something that had always been part of him, something that had been recorded, preserved, and guided without his knowing. And as he reached the console, the light responded instantly, brightening slightly, not in intensity, but in clarity, and a new set of lines formed across its surface, not like the screen before, not informational, but reflective, mirroring something deeper than data. And Ethan placed his hand against it without hesitation. And in that moment, the pulse aligned completely with his own, not separate, not distant, but unified. And Rex sat quietly beside him, calm, grounded, as if the journey that had begun with a single sound behind a hidden door had reached a point where understanding no longer required explanation, only acceptance of what had always been quietly true. The moment his hand rested fully against the surface, the light did not grow brighter. It grew deeper, shifting from something seen into something felt. And Ethan closed his eyes without realizing it, not out of hesitation, but because the sensation did not belong to sight. It belonged to memory, to something far beneath conscious thought, and the steady pulse that had guided him from the beginning no longer echoed through the room. It moved through him, aligning with his breath, his heartbeat, until there was no distinction between where it ended and he began. And in that stillness, fragments surfaced, not as images, not as sounds, but as impressions, moments where choices had been made without knowing why, where paths had been taken without question, where something unseen had always been present, not controlling, not forcing, but guiding with a quiet certainty that had never demanded recognition. And as those fragments settled into place, the console responded, lines of light forming beneath his hand, tracing patterns that mirrored the markings in the corridor. Only now they made sense, not as symbols, but as connections, linking every step he had taken to a structure that had existed long before he arrived. And Rex remained beside him, unmoving, his presence steady, as if he too understood that this was not something to interrupt, but something to witness. And Ethan slowly opened his eyes. The room unchanged yet entirely different, because now he saw it not as a hidden space, but as a continuation of something larger, something that had never been separate from his life, only hidden beneath it. And the console shifted again, the light narrowing into a single line that stretched forward, pointing beyond the chamber, beyond the walls, as if indicating a direction that extended far past the boundaries of this place. And Ethan felt the meaning of it before he fully understood it. This was not an ending, not a revelation meant to close a chapter, but a transition, a quiet passing from one understanding into another. And the realization did not overwhelm him. It settled gently, like something he had always known but had never needed to name. And as his hand lifted from the surface, the pulse remained, no longer confined to the structure beneath the house, but carried with him, steady and present. And Rex rose then, stretching slightly before stepping forward, his ears lifting toward the unseen distance beyond the chamber. And Ethan followed his gaze, not searching for answers, but acknowledging the path that had already begun to unfold. And in that moment, standing in a place that should not have existed, he understood that what he had found was not just a hidden truth, but a reminder that some things are not meant to be discovered all at once, but revealed over time, to those who continue moving forward without needing to know where the path will lead. The chamber did not close behind them. It remained open, silent, as if it no longer needed to hold anything in place. And Ethan stood there for a moment longer, feeling the quiet presence of the pulse within him, steady and unchanged, no longer tied to the structure beneath the house, but carried with him in a way that felt natural, almost familiar. And when he finally turned, the path back did not feel like a retreat. It felt like a continuation, each step guided not by uncertainty, but by a calm awareness that had settled deep within him. And Rex moved beside him with the same quiet confidence, his posture relaxed now, his movements no longer searching but simply following, as if whatever had drawn them here had fulfilled its purpose and left behind only direction. And as they moved back through the corridor, the markings along the walls no longer seemed abstract. They felt connected, part of a pattern that extended beyond the space itself, something that existed both here and beyond. And the hum that had once surrounded them faded gradually, not disappearing, but blending into the background of something larger, something that did not need to be heard to be understood. And when they reached the first chamber again, the cabinets stood exactly as they had before, unchanged, silent, holding their records without demand. And Ethan paused briefly, his gaze resting on them, not with curiosity, but with a quiet respect, as if acknowledging that what they contained was no longer something he needed to uncover piece by piece, because the understanding had already begun to take shape within him. And Rex gave a small, soft breath, turning his head toward the stairwell, and Ethan followed, ascending slowly, each step carrying him closer to the surface, to the world that had remained unchanged while everything within him had shifted. And when they reached the top, the door still stood open, the panel of wood resting aside as it had been left, and the house greeted them with the same stillness it had always held. The faint creak of beams, the quiet presence of wind brushing against the outer walls. And yet everything felt different, not because the space had changed, but because he had. And as Ethan stepped back into the room above, the weight that had once followed him, the quiet distance he had carried for years, felt lighter, not gone, but no longer unspoken, no longer without shape. And he crossed the room slowly, his hand brushing against the edge of the table as he moved, grounding himself in the familiar. And Rex settled near the doorway, watching him with calm, steady eyes. And for a moment, they simply remained there, the silence no longer empty, but full, holding something that did not need to be named. And as the first light of early morning began to filter through the windows, soft and pale, stretching across the floor in quiet lines, Ethan turned once more toward the hidden door, not with hesitation, but with a sense of closure that did not feel final, because he understood now that what had been revealed was not meant to stay behind. It was meant to move forward with him, shaping what came next in ways he did not need to fully understand yet. And as he stepped away from it, the house settled into stillness once more, not as a place that held secrets, but as a place that had fulfilled its purpose, waiting patiently for the next moment when someone would listen closely enough to hear what had always been there. The morning light did not rush into the room. It arrived slowly, stretching across the worn wooden floor in quiet lines that softened the edges of everything it touched, and Ethan stood near the window, his hand resting lightly against the frame, watching the pale gold reflection settle over the distant trees as if the world itself was waking without urgency, without demand, and for the first time in a long while, he did not feel the need to move before understanding where he was going, because something within him had shifted, not in a way that erased the past, but in a way that gave it shape, purpose, a place where it could exist, without pulling him backward. And Rex rose from his place near the doorway, stretching slowly before walking over, his steps quiet, steady, his presence unchanged yet somehow deeper, as if the bond between them had been reinforced by something neither of them needed to explain. And Ethan reached down, resting his hand against the dog's neck, feeling the warmth beneath the fur, the steady rhythm of life that had always been there, grounding him in the present. And outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, carrying a faint sound that almost resembled the rhythm he had heard before. But now it did not feel distant or hidden. It felt familiar, like something that had always existed in the background of the world, waiting to be noticed. And he stepped away from the window, moving through the house with a quiet awareness, each object, each sound, carrying a sense of clarity that had not been there before, not because they had changed, but because he had learned how to see them differently. And when he reached the place where the hidden door lay, he paused, not out of hesitation, but out of recognition, and slowly, he returned the panel of wood to its place, covering the steel beneath, not to hide it again, but to leave it as it had been, because he understood now that some things do not need to remain open to remain real. And as the panel settled into place, the house seemed to exhale, the faint creak of wood and the soft whisper of wind blending into a silence that felt complete rather than empty. And Rex watched him for a moment before turning toward the front door, his posture calm, his direction clear, and Ethan followed, stepping outside into the cool morning air, the sky wide above him, the light growing stronger with each passing second. And for a moment he simply stood there, breathing it in, feeling the steady presence within him align with the world around him, not separate, not distant, but part of something larger that did not need to be fully understood to be trusted. And as he began to walk, Rex at his side, the path ahead did not reveal itself all at once. It unfolded naturally, one step at a time, guided by something quiet and certain. And though he did not know where it would lead, he no longer needed to, because he understood that whatever had been waiting beneath that house was never meant to keep him there. It was meant to remind him that even the things we do not see are shaping the roads we walk. And sometimes, the greatest truth is not what we uncover, but what we carry forward after we choose to keep moving.